Okay. If you're just joining us, good morning. If we've been together from the top of the program, okay, this time our guest is Madaki Gwaza Michael. And this time we want to look at a serious topic because I think I said at the top that both of them have to do with the law. And we're talking about the removal of no less a person than the Benue Chief Judge by, again, no less an institution than the Benue State House of Assembly. So it's a very, very serious affair. In fact, there's no consensus on it yet because there seems to be still a lot, on the one hand, the Nigerian Bar Association is being blamed. On the other hand, the House is being blamed. So let me find out from you, first of all, why the removal? Why is it an issue that you want to remove the Benue Chief Judge? Because that's what the Assembly has already done, saying that it is covered by the law and that it, followed every process. So to now be challenged on it, they feel that's unconstitutional.
Thank you very much, Yori, for having me on. I think to answer the question why remove the Chief Judge, we need to go back to essentially the arguments on the floor of the House for the day when the matter came up. Okay. And I listened to the majority leader of the House make a presentation that basically brought in allegations against actions that were considered to be inappropriate by the Chief Judge. Now, those allegations stemmed from flagrant disobeying of laws that are properly passed by the Benue State House of Assembly, particularly the Benue State Electoral Law, which made provisions for the payment of, I think, some kind of security for people that are challenging election in the election petitions. There was a provision in the law, I think, that speaks to mandatory payment of a fee before your petition should be properly filed. That is the provision of the law. And I think the Chief Judge had issued some sort of regulation or directive to that simply put that aside. So in their view, that was an attempt to undermine the powers of the House to legislate. They also made mentions of his dabbling into misappropriating certain funds and about certain appointments that he made to the length and breadth of the judiciary in Benue State that seems to be sort of nepotic in nature and all of that. So these were all the things that they came together and they decided that, look, according to provisions of the Constitution that makes for the appointment of the Chief Judge, there are also certain circumstances under which the Chief Judge can also be removed. And that presentation by the majority leader laid out those issues, and it was on the basis of that that they made prayers for the House to approve. Now, you need to note that the prayers, after laying out this petition or the position paper to the House, this is the why that needed to be done. The prayers that were made to the House were two in nature. There was a prayer to remove the Chief Judge, and then the prayer to recommend him to the NJC for his removal as a judicial officer. Okay.
And they seem to decline to so do.
The NJC?
Yes.
Okay, I think the NJC...
Because they are saying that the Chief Judge remains in place.
Okay, so I'm not sure how they would have reacted a few hours immediately after the House has taken their position. But the point I need to make clear here is that this. The House acted under Section 292, 1A of the Constitution, 1A2 of the Constitution that makes provision for the removal of the Chief Judge. Now, I need to make the clarification here. You read that there are two issues in discussion here. Okay. There is the removal of the Chief Judge as the head of court in the state. Then there's the removal of the Chief Judge as a judicial officer. I need you to know that a judicial officer is different from the head of the court.
Yes, okay.
You are first of all appointed as a judicial officer, as a judge in the State High Court or as a Justice of the Supreme Court. That is the judicial officer position. But the head of court could be the Chief Judge, could be the President of the Customary Court of Appeal, or could be the Grand Cadi of the Sharia Court of Appeal. The appointment to the position of the head of court is separate and distinct from the appointment to be a judicial officer.
Okay.
Now, if you go...
It's getting a bit technical now.
No, it's very clear. It only becomes technical when people start reading their own inferences into the matter. Okay. The law is very clear and it's succinct. If you read the entire section 292, it speaks about the removal of the head of court. And it says it is the governor and the House of Assembly. The NJC is not mentioned in the entirety of that very provision.
Okay.
A few lines down in section 292 sub B, it mentions the governor, the House of Assembly, and the NJC. That position relates to the removal of a judicial officer. Okay. Remove you from being a judge entirely.
You get the point. See, you were just trying to make a distinction between a judicial officer and
the head of court. The
head of court.
Yes.
And the chief judge
is the head of court.
Indeed, he's the head of court.
Yes. So to remove the head of court under section 292(1)(a) by its clear provisions, it is between the governor and the State House of Assembly. But to remove somebody as a judicial officer, it is the governor, the NJC, and the State House of Assembly. These are the three bodies that are provided. Now, if you look at it from the level of acting to remove the head of court, which is the head of the judiciary in the state, you have two actors, the executive, which is the governor, and the legislature, which is the House of Assembly, acting together to remove the head of the judiciary. That goes all the way back to the fundamental tenets of democracy that practice watching after each other, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. But when you attempt to remove somebody as a judicial officer, that is when the NJC is removed. Surely the framers of the Constitution could not have omitted mentioning the NJC, then 2 lines later in the same Constitution, remember to mention the NJC. Is it confusing that the NJC, because in the first instance, those of us, I omitted to say that our guest, Madaki Gwaza Michael Esquire, is a lawyer, yes, as well as a public affairs analyst, and we've seen evidence of that. So I was going to ask, all of the removals that you've explained, surely isn't it on recommendation to the NJC for consideration and a final pronouncement on? Okay, so I go back to the Constitution. What exactly does the wordings of section 292(1)(a) say? The NJC is not mentioned there. Okay. Now, I've seen people make spoken about this matter and then related it to the case of the former Chief Judge of Kwara State, wherein they mentioned that involving the NJC in the removal of that Chief Judge is mandatory. Now, when people make their analysis, I do not begrudge them, but we need to look at what the law says. In the Kwara State case, the Chief Judge was removed by then Governor Bukola Saraki from being Chief Judge. It was between the governor and the State House of Assembly. That's how yes, it was between the governor and the State House of Assembly. She did not agree with that position and she went to court. She filed a suit before the Federal High Court in the Ilorin Division. And when the matter came up, the question was, if the governor had powers under the law to remove her from the position of Chief Judge without making recourse to the NJC. The matter went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held at that point that to remove, yes, in fact, the Supreme Court agreed that section 292 does not make any mention of the NJC. But the Supreme Court went ahead to bring an extensive interpretation of the Constitution by making reference to the 3rd schedule of the Constitution. The schedules of the Constitution are parts of the Constitution, but they are procedural in nature, sort of bringing clarity to what the substantive provisions of the Constitution provide for. So the Supreme Court interpreted the 3rd schedule to the Constitution that makes a provision for the powers of the NJC, merged it together with section 292 that does not mention NJC, and said in the overall interest of justice. You know, this is the Supreme Court now being embarking on what I call judicial activism, because it is not provided in the Constitution, but they acted as an activism court in that matter. You know, the Supreme Court is also a policy court. So to get the overall interest of, safeguard the overall interest of the law and the country, they sometimes embark on those kind of stuff. So they embarked on judicial activism to interpret that the third schedule of the Constitution, which is procedural in nature, should be read together with the substantive part of the Constitution, which is the main part of the ground norm, and in reading that, made the decision that the NJC has to be involved before the removal of the Chief Judge.
Indeed.
Now,
but
let me just add that, because the Onogen's case came up later, which was the primary example of how...
I have a guest, I have a caller that has been waiting, so I'll come back to you for you to finish your thought on that. Yes, Mr. George, you're a return caller today. Good morning again.
I'm sorry, Uncle Yori, to
no
come
problem.
back. But
no problem.
What you're talking about is very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Yori, the governor of Benue State is a reverend father. I know he came to that position based mainly on the popularity he had among the average Benue people. What I am seeing happening, he has to be very careful. Otherwise, that popularity will wane very, very fast. The gentleman before you is a lawyer. What I'm hearing him say looks like approbating and reprobating at the same time. There is no judge, no chief judge, that doesn't function both as the chief judge and a judicial officer. If you are saying that his removal is subject to only the governor's whims and caprices, but his appointment is subject to NJC's confirmation, are you going to, if he commits an offense for a removal, are you going to cut him to two so that half of him will be removed and vice versa when it concerns the one that, look, we have to be very careful in this country. What I gathered was that those lawmakers that opted out, they said both the allegations against the chief judge and the
Benue State
decision to remove him by the assembly were brought the same morning, the same day. Usually, when such matters come to the assembly, it will be assigned to a committee to look into it in terms of investigation. The substance of the allegations is not even the issue now, but the procedures being adopted. This procedure looks very faulty and pregnant because it's not transparent. It looks like there's something hidden in it, which the governor does not want transparency to expose. There is no reason why there's no reason, whether it is constitutional or moral, for you to remove the chief judge of a state, which is the head of another arm of the government, without reference to the National Judicial Council. He cannot be appointed either unless the National Judicial Council confirms it. You make allegations against him, fine. Why don't you allow the National Judicial Council to look at the allegations before you recommend his removal? From what we know, Uncle Yori, removal and appointment of judges is subject to the consent of the National Judicial Council, both at the state level and at the federal level. Why should that of Benue State be different?
Exactly.
Let's speak the truth.
All right then. So, and as I was saying earlier, there are news reports that the NJC says, as far as it concerns Justice Maurice Ikwembese, remains the Chief Judge of Benue State. So this is a bit confusing against the commentary that you've just heard. Would you like to comment on that viewer who was called?
Okay, Mr. George's call.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, George, for your call. I would like to, first of all, point out that the governor, yes, is a reverend father, but when he stepped into the world of politics and ran for election, it was simply because he felt he was what the people needed. And democracy is a game of numbers.
And they agreed with him.
They did.
The
Donald Trump was just re-elected back as president after a 4-year hiatus. At that time, the people felt it was not needed. They've now agreed that they need him back. So you see, it is what the people, if the people from what is happening in Benue State, the politics, the governance of it, the people have an opportunity in the next round of elections. If they do not like what the governor is doing, they will audit him, and the result will come out at the polls. But as regards this issue of the removal of the chief judge, George, please, I am not saying what I feel or what I want. I'll urge you and basically all watchers and readers of this event to read the Constitution.
Okay.
Section 292 makes a claim, a clear statement that does not involve the NJC.
But since
2 paragraphs later,
yes,
the same Constitution mentions the NJC.
Yes.
So I am not the one saying this.
Okay, but as that viewer pointed out, there is no judge that is, as the head of court, that is also not a judicial officer.
Very well, but then there are judges that are also not heads of court.
Indeed.
You can't be a judge, you will not be a head of court.
Okay, maybe you return to that point. Let me bring on Reverend Dominic. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Yori. Good morning to your guests.
Yes. Madaki.
Please, for a particular reason, can I make one sentence on your first topic, the South-South issue?
Okay, okay. Okay, but just don't take too long there. Don't take too long there so you don't break our train of thought. We finished with that. So don't take too long there, but go ahead.
Just take that time.
Okay.
There's no need of this South-South. You know how it works. So that is why we are not patient to wait for another round of election, because they know their vote will not count. It's when you become a governor, you have the power of incumbency. You can push people around. I want to plead to the political elites to allow our institutions to work. Toying with judges will not do us well. Please,
all right. That point has been made, but I got to give the guests, our guests, some time to respond. Thank you very much, Reverend Dominic. I know there's a bit more there, but even our guest is under pressure for time. Yes. We've almost made up our time.
Okay, so thank you very much for your call.
Yes.
I think
Reverend Dominic.
Reverend Dominic, we really appreciate your insights. The issue as relates to the independence of the judiciary as provided for under the Constitution is not independent of the existence of the other arms of government. This is a democracy. There's the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. They are separate, they operate independently, but they watch each other. If you establish one arm to be wholly independent of each other without any form of check and balance, you are creating a monster. That is why the judiciary, with all the independence and powers it has, needs to be checked by the other 2 arms. This is constitutional. This is not me saying it. And it applies to all judges and all houses of assembly and all executive governors across the country. So, I think I need to make the point very clear. Your last question to me about being a judicial officer and also being a head of court. Difference. The moment you understand it in that light, this whole thing becomes very clear. It becomes very clear.
Okay.
Because so, for example, on the Supreme Court of Nigeria, you have to be a justice of the Supreme Court before you are appointed as the Chief Justice of Nigeria.
Okay.
But you can, you can be removed as the Chief Justice of Nigeria. You get the point I'm making?
Yes,
you have to occupy one position before you get to the other.
Yes.
To remove the Chief Justice of Nigeria, it has to be between the President and the Senate.
Okay.
To remove a judicial officer sitting on the Supreme Court has to be between the President, the NJC, and the Senate.
Okay, so you're still making this distinction.
It is very, very clear. Let me give you a simple example. Okay. You know, we like borrowing things, but we don't apply them as it suits us. Okay. In the United States of America, under their Constitution, the Chief Justice of the United States is a separate office from the other associate.
Do have a great weekend. Bye-bye for now. Do have a great weekend. Bye-bye for now.